Yesterday morning, my son Ryan called me, his voice cracking with panic. "Mom, why are all the cards declined? My mother-in-law and I couldn't pay for lunch at the restaurant. People are laughing at us." His desperation filled me with a satisfaction I never thought I'd feel toward my own child. But to understand why I reached this point, I have to tell you what happened the evening before, when my daughter-in-law Dana decided to humiliate me in front of the whole family. I'm 68 years old, and for the last few years, ever since I was widowed, I've become the personal ATM for my son and his wife. Every whim, every craving, every unnecessary expense came out of my savings. But yesterday, while I was serving coffee in my own home, Dana turned to her friends who had come to visit and let slip the words that would change everything forever. "That old woman is only good for paying our bills." My son Ryan, instead of defending me, burst out laughing as if he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. I stood there, coffee pot in hand, watching them make fun of me in my own living room. My hands trembled, but not from sadness. They trembled with a cold rage I had never felt before, because in that moment, I understood something I had been denying for years. To them, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a mother-in-law. I wasn't even a person. I was just a bank account with legs. For 10 years, I was their financial salvation. When Ryan lost his job, I paid his rent for 8 months, $800 a month that came out of my pension without him lifting a finger to look for real work. When Dana wanted to refresh her entire wardrobe because she needed to look professional, it was $3,000 on my credit card. When they wanted to go on vacation to Hawaii because they deserved it after so much stress, another $5,000 disappeared from my savings. They never invited me on those vacations, of course. I was good enough to pay, not to accompany them. "It's a romantic trip, Mom," Ryan would tell me whenever I hinted that I'd like to see the ocean. "You understand, right?" And I, like the fool I was for years, always understood. Always paid, always kept quiet, while they lived the life I financed. The last straw came 3 months ago, when Dana decided she needed a new car. "The one we have is getting too old, Georgia," she told me in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something expensive. "Besides, if we're going to have kids soon, we need something safer." A $15,000 down payment, $15,000 that represented 2 years of my savings, but I paid it, as always, because it was for the good of the family. But yesterday, after hearing those venomous words, after seeing my own son laugh at me, something in my heart changed forever. That night I couldn't sleep, not from sadness, but from a clarity that burned inside me. I got up at 3 in the morning, turned on my computer, and began making the decisions I should have made years ago. First, I canceled all the additional cards they had in my name, every single one of the 5 cards they used as if they were their own. Then, I closed the shared savings account where I deposited money every month for emergencies that were never real emergencies, but rather expensive restaurant bills and designer clothes. I also changed all the passwords to my bank accounts and removed their names from my automatic transfers. At 6 in the morning, when I was done, I poured myself a coffee and sat in my favorite armchair. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I knew that soon my phone would ring, and on the other end would be my desperate, humiliated son demanding an explanation, and I would be ready to give him one. The phone rang at exactly 9:15 in the morning. I was sitting in my kitchen, enjoying my second coffee of the day, when I saw Ryan's name on the screen. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring 3 more times while I savored a moment of power I hadn't felt in decades. When I finally picked up, his voice was desperate, almost hysterical. "Mom, why are all the cards declined? I'm here at the Crestview Grill with Dana's mother. We wanted to have lunch and celebrate her birthday, but none of the cards work. It's humiliating. People are staring at us. The waiter is getting impatient, and I don't have enough cash to pay a $200 bill. What's going on?" The irony was delicious. They had chosen the Crestview Grill, the most expensive restaurant in town, to impress Dana's mother. The same place I was never invited to, despite having paid for family dinners there for years when they went without me. Now they were there, surrounded by the high society they so desperately wanted to impress, and they couldn't even pay for a single dish. "Good morning, Ryan," I replied with a calmness that surprised even me. "The cards are canceled because I've decided I'm no longer going to finance your lifestyle." "What? Are you crazy? We're in public. Dana's mother is here. How am I supposed to explain that my own mother left me high and dry? This is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous, son, was hearing you laugh yesterday when your wife said I was only good for paying your bills. What's ridiculous is realizing that for 10 years I've been treated like an ATM instead of your mother." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear voices in the background, probably Dana and her mother wondering what was happening. The waiter must have been waiting for the payment, and other diners were likely starting to notice the awkward situation. "Mom, please, don't do this now. We can talk later, but I need you to reactivate the cards. Just for today, I promise." I cut him off. "No more promises, Ryan. No more just for today. For 10 years, I've heard the same promises. For 10 years, I've been your easy solution for everything. But yesterday, I learned something important. You don't respect me, you don't value me, and you definitely don't love me the way I loved you." "That's not true. Of course we love you. Dana was just joking. You know how she is." "I know exactly how she is, Ryan, and I know exactly how you are. That's why I made this decision." I could hear him breathing heavily. I imagined the situation at the restaurant was getting more tense with each passing minute. His mother-in-law had probably noticed something was wrong, that the gold card he always used to impress wasn't working. "Mom, please, we can't just stand here. What do you want us to do? Wash dishes? Should we call the police? This is a humiliation." "Now you know how I felt for years," I replied. "The difference is, you're 35 years old and should be able to solve your own problems." "Are you sick? Are you feeling okay? This isn't like you, Mom. You've never been this cruel." Cruel. That word hit me like a slap. I was cruel after years of sacrificing, of depriving myself of things I wanted to give them everything they asked for. After working until I was 65 to ensure they had a decent inheritance, after being left alone every Christmas while they traveled with my gifts of money. "Cruel was laughing at me yesterday," I said with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "Cruel was treating me like I was invisible for years, except when you needed money. Cruel was making me feel like my only value as a mother and as a person was my bank account." "Mom, Dana didn't mean it like that." "Dana said exactly what she thought, and you agreed with her. You both made it very clear what my place is in your lives." I heard louder voices in the background. Dana asking what was going on, her mother making comments I couldn't quite distinguish, but that sounded annoyed. The waiter had probably already brought the check and was waiting with that forced patience they use when they know there's a problem. "Look, Mom, I get that you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it. We can sit down and talk like adults, but right now, I need you to help me. Just this one more time, and then we can change things. Just this one more time." I laughed, and my own laughter sounded strange, bitter. Do you know how many times I've heard that phrase? Do you know how many last times I've financed over the past 10 years? "But Mom..." "No, Ryan, not this time. This time, you're going to have to find another solution. You have jobs, you have friends, you have in-laws. Figure it out." "How are we going to explain to Dana's mother that my own mom abandoned us in a restaurant? How am I going to face the people who know us? Everyone is going to be talking about this." And there it was, the naked truth. He wasn't worried about fixing our relationship. He wasn't reflecting on how they had treated me. He only cared about his image, his reputation, what people would think. Just like always. "That's your problem to solve, son. For years, I worried about your image, your comfort, your happiness. Now it's time for me to worry about mine." "You can't do this. You're my mother." "Exactly. I'm your mother, not your employee. I'm your mother, not your personal bank. I'm your mother, not your financial lifeline. And as your mother, I should have taught you years ago how to stand on your own 2 feet. There was another longer silence. This time I could feel his desperation through the phone. He was probably doing mental calculations, thinking about who he could call, how he could get out of this situation without completely losing face. Mom, please. Dana is crying. Her mother is asking what kind of family we are. The waiter has already asked us 3 times if everything is okay. Please have mercy. Mercy. Another word that made me tremble. Where was their mercy when I stayed up late calculating how to pay their expenses on top of my own? Where was their compassion when I deprived myself of buying new clothes so I could give them money for their whims? Mercy is earned over years, Ryan, and you two lost it yesterday. I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear or sadness. They were trembling with adrenaline, with a sense of power I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time in years, I had put my own needs first. For the first time in years, I had said no. For the next 30 minutes, the phone didn't stop ringing. First, it was Ryan again, then Dana, then a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed belonged to Dana's mother. Every call I rejected gave me more strength, more conviction that I was doing the right thing. I poured another coffee and sat on my patio, enjoying the silence I had missed so much. But the calm didn't last long. At 11 in the morning, I heard the unmistakable sound of Ryan's car pulling into my driveway. The car I had helped pay for, of course. 2 doors slammed shut, and I heard hurried footsteps heading toward my front door. The knocking started immediately, loud and insistent. Mom, open the door. We need to talk. Ryan's voice sounded different now, more desperate, but also more aggressive. I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway. I didn't move. I remained seated on my back patio, invisible from the front entrance, watching the birds visit the feeder I had installed last year. It was funny how the small pleasures in life took on new meaning when you finally had the peace of mind to enjoy them. Georgia! Now it was Dana's voice, sharp and demanding. We know you're there. Stop acting like a child and come out and face us. Face them. As if I were the one who had done something wrong, as if I were the one who owed an explanation after years of financial and emotional abuse. The irony was so absurd it almost made me laugh. The knocking intensified. I could hear they were using their feet now, not just their fists. My front door, the oak door my late husband had installed with such care, was being pounded on as if it were the entrance to a seedy bar. This is ridiculous, Dana shouted. You made us look like beggars in front of everyone. Ryan's mother-in-law had to pay for our lunch. A 70-year-old woman had to take money out of her purse because her daughter-in-law is a lunatic. Ah, so that's what happened. Dana's mother had to rescue them. I pictured the scene. Ryan sweating bullets as he tried to explain why none of his cards were working, Dana making up pathetic excuses, and finally the older woman having to save the day. The humiliation must have been exquisite. Mom, please. Ryan sounded on the verge of tears. People are already talking. Everyone at the restaurant was staring at us. Some even took out their phones. This is going to be all over social media. Social media. Of course, that was their biggest concern. Not the fact that they had hurt their mother, not the recognition that they had crossed a line. They only cared about their public image, their reputation in those social circles where they loved to show off the lifestyle I financed. The knocking stopped for a moment, but I could hear their voices arguing in furious whispers. They were probably deciding on their next strategy. I knew Dana well enough to know she had a full arsenal of emotional manipulations, and Ryan had learned well from her over the years. Georgia, Dana's voice changed tone completely. Now it sounded soft, almost sweet. I know you're upset and you have every right to be. Maybe what I said yesterday sounded bad, but you know I didn't mean it. I was just joking with my friends. You know how we women are when we get together. Sometimes we say things without thinking. It was fascinating to hear how she could change her personality in seconds. From the furious woman who had been screaming and kicking my door, she had now transformed into the understanding daughter-in-law who had only made a small communication error. Mom, now it was Ryan who had adopted the gentle tone. I understand we hurt you. Dana explained to me what happened yesterday, and you're right to be upset. But declining the cards doesn't solve anything. It just makes things worse for everyone. For everyone. Not for me, of course. For them, for their comfort, for their lifestyle. My emotional well-being was still not part of the equation. Please, Mom, we can fix this. We can change things. Ryan's voice broke slightly. But I need you to reactivate the cards today. I have bills due. The car insurance is due tomorrow, and Dana has doctor's appointments this week. We can't just be left without money out of the blue. Without money? As if it were their money, as if I were responsible for their insurance, their medical appointments, their expenses as independent adults. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that they truly didn't see the difference between my money and theirs. In their minds, my savings were a family resource, not the result of decades of work and sacrifice from a woman who had already paid her dues in life. Georgia, please think about what you're doing. Dana had switched strategies again. Now her voice sounded concerned, almost motherly. What will people think if they find out you cut off your own son? What will they say at church? What will the family think? The church, the family. It was always the same with her, using my reputation, my relationships, my image as emotional leverage. As if my worth as a person depended on what others thought. As if my dignity was less important than the opinion of people who probably didn't even know how they treated me in the privacy of our home. Look, Mom. Ryan had adopted a more serious, more adult tone now. I understand you want us to change some things. We can talk about boundaries, about how to better manage the family finances. But this isn't the way. This is emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation. The words echoed in my head like a slap. I was being emotionally manipulative after years of subtle blackmail, of being made to feel guilty every time I hesitated to give them money, of them using my motherly love to empty my bank account. The projection was so obvious it almost made me laugh. The knocking started again, but now more spaced out, less aggressive. They were realizing that the brute force strategy wasn't working. I could hear them move away from the door, probably walking around the house to see if they could spot me through a window. "Georgia!" Dana yelled from what sounded like my side window. "We saw your shadow. We know you're in there. Stop hiding like a coward." Coward. There was the real Dana again, the one who emerged when the sweet manipulations failed, the woman who had called me that old woman the day before, who had turned my generosity into a reason for mockery, who had trained my son to see me as a resource instead of a person. I got up from my chair and walked slowly to the window from where she had shouted. I pulled back the curtain just enough for her to see me, and our eyes met through the glass. Her expression immediately changed from fury to relief, and then to that fake smile I knew so well. "There you are," she exclaimed, as if she had just found a lost child. "Come on, let's open the door and talk like a family." I looked her directly in the eyes for a long moment, feeling a strange calm. Then, very slowly, I closed the curtain again. I heard her shriek of frustration, followed by more pounding on the window, but this time I didn't flinch. I went back to my patio and sat down again. The phone immediately started ringing, but I silenced it. For the first time in years, my home was truly my own. The shouting and banging continued for another hour, but they gradually lost intensity. From my back patio, I could hear fragments of their frustrated conversations, their desperate plans to make me change my mind. Dana suggested calling a locksmith to force the door open, but Ryan reminded her that would be breaking and entering. Even in their desperation, they didn't want to risk real legal trouble. Finally, I heard the car doors slam shut and the engine drive away, but I knew this was far from over. I knew Dana well enough to know she was already planning her next move, probably something more elaborate and emotional. I wasn't wrong. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone started ringing with unknown numbers. First, it was Dana's mother, her voice polite but firm. "Georgia, dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Dana told me what happened, and I'm sure we can resolve this like civilized adults." I hung up without answering. Then it was my sister Elaine, who lives in another state and had obviously received a heavily edited version of the events. "Georgia, Ryan called me very worried. He says you're acting strangely and that you left them stranded at a restaurant. Are you okay? Are you feeling sick?" "I'm perfectly fine, Elaine," I replied. "Better than ever, in fact." "But I don't understand. Ryan says you canceled all their cards without any warning. That doesn't sound like the Georgia I know. You've always been so generous with your family." "Maybe that was the problem," I said. "Maybe I was too generous for too long." "But Georgia, they're your family. Dana says you're punishing them for an innocent joke. Surely you can sit down and talk this out." An innocent joke. It was impressive how Dana had managed to rewrite history in just a few hours. What had been a cruel humiliation in front of guests had now become an innocent joke that I had misinterpreted because I was too sensitive. "Elaine, have you ever felt like an ATM for your kids?" I asked directly. "What? No, why do you ask?" "Because that's exactly what I am to Ryan and Dana, and yesterday I finally realized it." "Georgia, you're exaggerating. Parents always help their children. It's normal. Is it normal to pay your adult son's rent for years? Is it normal to finance their vacations while you stay home alone? Is it normal for them to make fun of you for being generous?" Elaine was quiet for a moment. "Well, maybe they've taken advantage of your generosity a bit, but cutting everything off at once seems very drastic." "You know what's drastic, Elaine? Working until you're 65 to secure a decent inheritance for your son, only to find out he's already spending it while you're still alive." After that conversation, I decided to unplug the house phone. I put my cell phone on airplane mode. I needed silence to process everything I was feeling, to plan my next steps. That evening, as I prepared dinner for myself for the first time in months without the anxiety of waiting for calls asking for money, I realized something important. I didn't feel guilty. My whole life I had been trained to feel guilty when I didn't meet the needs of others, especially my family. But this time, that familiar guilt wasn't there. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: mental clarity. It was as if I had been living in an emotional fog and could finally see clearly. Every decision I had made in the last 10 years flashed through my mind like a movie, and I could see patterns I hadn't wanted to acknowledge before. The cycle was always the same. Ryan or Dana would approach me with a temporary financial problem. I would initially resist. They would apply emotional pressure. "It's just this once. We're desperate. What will people think?" I would give in. They would solve their immediate problem, and a few weeks later, a new temporary problem would appear. There was never a real repayment plan, never a genuine acknowledgement of my sacrifice, and definitely never an invitation to share in the benefits of my own generosity. I paid for their vacations but wasn't invited. I financed their dinners at fancy restaurants but ate alone at home. I covered their medical expenses, but no one asked about my health. I got up and walked to my study, where I kept all my financial documents. It was time to do the real math, to understand exactly how much I had spent on them over the years. I pulled out my bank statements from the last 5 years and started calculating. The figure was devastating: $86,000. $86,000 in 5 years. That didn't even count the previous years, when I didn't keep such detailed records. It was more than half of my total pension, more than what many people earn in 2 years of work. But the most painful part wasn't the amount of money. It was realizing that in exchange for those $86,000, I had received mockery, indifference, and the treatment of being seen as an obligation rather than a blessing. As I reviewed the numbers, I found something that made me tremble with rage. They had been using one of my cards for premium streaming services, expensive gym memberships, and magazine subscriptions I didn't even know existed. Small monthly charges that added up to hundreds of dollars a year, money that was automatically coming out of my account to pay for luxuries I never enjoyed. That night, I made another important decision. I took my will out of the file cabinet and read it carefully. I had drafted that document 5 years ago when I still believed I was securing the future of a loving and grateful family. Ryan was the sole beneficiary of everything: the house, the savings accounts, the investments, everything. But now, I saw that will with different eyes. Why should I leave my entire estate to someone who had already spent more than half of it while I was still alive? Why reward someone with an inheritance who had treated me like a resource instead of a mother? I decided that the next day, I would call my lawyer to schedule an appointment. It was time to make some significant changes to my estate plans. If Ryan wanted to treat me like a bank, then he would have to be content with the interest, not the principal. I went to bed that night with a strange but liberating feeling. For the first time in years, I had made decisions based solely on my own well-being. For the first time in years, I hadn't stayed awake worrying about the financial problems of other adults. I slept better than I had in months. The next day, I woke up with an energy I hadn't felt in years. It was Friday, and for the first time in a long time, I had plans that didn't involve solving anyone else's problems. First, I would call my lawyer, then I would go to the bank to make some additional changes. And maybe, just maybe, I would buy myself something nice with the money I normally would have spent on someone else's whims. I plugged the house phone back in while I made breakfast. As expected, I had 14 messages on the answering machine. I listened to them while I drank my coffee, and each one confirmed that I had made the right decision. Message 1. Dana, with a tearful voice. Georgia, it's Dana. I know you're upset, but please think about what you're doing. Ryan didn't sleep at all last night. He's so worried about you. He says he's never seen you like this. Please call us. Message 2. Ryan, sounding desperate. Mom, I need to talk to you. I went to the bank this morning and they told me you closed the account where you deposited money for our emergencies. Why would you do that? That account was for both of us. It was fascinating how he continued to refer to my money as ours. That account had never been for both of us. It was my money that I deposited for their supposed emergencies, which invariably turned out to be vacations, expensive clothes, or restaurants. Message 3. Elaine again. Georgia, Ryan called me again. He says you also closed a savings account. Are you sure about what you're doing? Don't you think you're being a little radical? The following messages followed the same pattern. Feigned concern, questioning my mental health, and pleas disguised as sisterly advice. But message number 11 caught my attention. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mrs. Whitlock, this is Oscar, my cousin Dana's husband. Look, I know we don't know each other well, but Dana asked me to call you. She's very worried because she says you're acting very strangely. As a man, I think sometimes women complicate things more than necessary. Why don't you just forgive and forget? Family is the most important thing. Family is the most important thing. What a convenient philosophy when it comes to maintaining a status quo that benefits them. I wondered if Oscar would be so willing to forgive and forget if someone made fun of him in front of his family while emptying his bank account. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called the law firm where I had made my will. The secretary told me that Mr. Coleman had a cancellation and could see me that same afternoon at 2. Perfect. Then I called the bank and requested an appointment with the manager to review all my accounts and make some additional security changes. I also wanted to make sure that Ryan had no access to any information about my finances. As I was getting ready to leave, the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it was Ryan and Dana again, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Lucy standing on the porch. Lucy was a 62-year-old woman who had been widowed 2 years ago, and we occasionally chatted over the garden fence. I opened the door with some curiosity. Lucy had never formally come to visit me before. "Good morning, Georgia," she said with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I heard a lot of noise and shouting yesterday, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." I invited her in and served her coffee. It was refreshing to have someone in my house who wasn't there to ask for money or manipulate me emotionally. "Is everything all right?" she asked with genuine concern. "Yesterday I saw your son and his wife were here for hours, shouting and banging on the door. I was about to call the police." I told her the whole story, not the intimate details, but enough for her to understand the situation. Lucy listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding with expressions of understanding. "Georgia," she said when I finished, "I have to confess something. For years, I've watched how they treat you when they come to visit. I've seen them arrive in new cars, dressed in expensive clothes, talking on the latest phones. Meanwhile, you're still driving the same car from 10 years ago and shopping at discount stores." Her words hit me because it was external confirmation of something I had been denying internally. Others could see the obvious that I had refused to acknowledge. "But what has struck me the most," Lucy continued, "is that I've never seen them do anything for you. I've never seen them help you with your groceries, fix something in your house, or simply visit you without it being to ask for something." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, feeling a mix of shame and relief. "To someone looking from the outside, yes, but I understand why you couldn't see it. When you're a mother, you always want to believe the best of your children." Lucy stayed for another hour, and our conversation was the most honest and liberating one I'd had in months. She told me about her own experiences with adult children who expected her to solve all their problems and how she had learned to set boundaries after being widowed. "You know what helped me the most?" she said before leaving, "realizing that being a good mother doesn't mean being a martyr. You can love your children without sacrificing your dignity for them." Her words resonated in my mind all the way to the bank. In the manager's office, we reviewed all my accounts and implemented new security measures. I changed all the passwords, added two-factor authentication, and made sure that only I had access to any financial information. "Mrs. Whitlock," the manager said as he processed the changes, "may I ask why these drastic changes? Do you have any specific security concerns?" "Let's just say I finally realized that my biggest financial security risk lives in my own family," I replied. The manager nodded with understanding. "It's more common than you think, ma'am. We see many cases of older adults being taken advantage of financially by relatives. You did the right thing by protecting yourself." After the bank, I went to lunch by myself at a small, cozy restaurant I had always wanted to try, but had never allowed myself the luxury. I ordered the most expensive dish on the menu, a glass of wine, and dessert. The total bill was $45, less than what Ryan and Dana spent on a single round of drinks on their nights out. As I savored my lunch, I realized something important. It had been years since I had enjoyed a meal without the constant anxiety of calculating how much it was costing me, how much I might need to set aside for Ryan's next emergency, or whether I could afford this small personal pleasure. For the first time in years, I was eating with true appetite and enjoyment. The appointment with Mr. Coleman, the lawyer, was revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. When I explained the situation and my desire to change my will, he showed no surprise at all. In fact, he told me that cases like mine were more frequent than I imagined. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said as he reviewed my current will, "I see we drafted this document 5 years ago. At that time, you designated your entire estate to your son, Ryan. Are you sure you want to make significant changes?" "Completely sure," I replied. Over these 5 years, I've seen my son's true character. He has shown that he doesn't value my generosity, and frankly, he has already spent more than half of his inheritance while I'm still alive. The lawyer took notes as I detailed the $86,000 I had documented, not counting the previous years. His eyebrows raised slightly when I mentioned the figure. "I understand your position," he said. "What kind of changes are you considering?" "I want to divide my estate. A portion for charitable organizations that truly help people in need, not capricious adults. Another portion for my sister Elaine, who has always been independent and has never asked me for anything. And for Ryan." I paused. "For Ryan, just enough to show that I haven't disinherited him out of malice, but not enough for him to continue living without working." "Are you thinking of a specific percentage?" 50% for charity, 30% for my sister, and 20% for Ryan, with the condition that he can only receive his share if he demonstrates a full year of complete financial independence. The lawyer smiled slightly. "That last condition is interesting and completely legal. You're essentially incentivizing personal responsibility." I left the law firm feeling a deep satisfaction. For the first time in years, I had made decisions about my future that reflected my real values, not my fears or my maternal guilt. When I got home, there was an unfamiliar car in my driveway. An older woman, elegantly dressed, was standing on my porch. It was Dana's mother, Claudia. "Georgia," she said with a forced smile when she saw me arrive. "Good, you're here. We need to have a woman-to-woman talk." I invited her in, more out of curiosity than politeness. I wanted to hear what version of the events this woman had received. "Look, dear," Claudia began once we were seated. "I know there was a misunderstanding yesterday between you and the kids. Dana told me everything, and frankly, I think you're exaggerating the situation." "Exaggerating?" I asked. "Well, yes. Dana says she made a comment that you misinterpreted, and now you've taken very drastic measures. Canceling your own son's credit cards. That seems like a very extreme reaction for a simple joke between women." A simple joke between women. It was impressive how the narrative had evolved. Now it wasn't just an innocent joke, but it was also my fault for not having a sense of humor. "Claudia," I said calmly, "do you give your daughter unlimited credit cards?" "No, but..." "Do you pay your adult daughter's rent?" "No, but that's different." "Do you finance your daughter's vacations while you stay home alone?" Claudia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Georgia, every family handles their finances differently." "Exactly. And I've decided to handle mine differently from now on." "But think about Dana and Ryan. They're young. They're building their future. They need support." "They are 35 and 32, respectively. At that age, I had already raised a son, worked for years, and saved for my old age, without help from my parents." "Times were different then." "Times are different. That's true. Now there are more opportunities, better education, more access to bank loans. There's no reason why two educated adults can't support themselves." Claudia changed her strategy. "Georgia, Dana is very upset. She cried all night yesterday. She says she has always seen you as a second mother and doesn't understand why you're suddenly rejecting her." "A second mother who is only good for paying bills, according to her own words." "That was a joke. Women always complain about their mothers-in-law. It's normal." "Complaining in private is one thing, Claudia. Humiliating someone in front of guests is something else entirely." The conversation continued for another half hour, with Claudia using every manipulation tactic in the book. Guilt. Think about how your son feels. Fear. You're going to end up alone. Shame. What will people think? And even veiled threats. Dana has contacts in social services. Finally, when she realized that none of her tactics were working, she switched to a more direct approach. "Georgia, I'm going to be frank with you. Dana and Ryan are considering seeking legal help. There are ways to declare a person mentally incompetent if they show erratic behavior with their finances." There it was. The real threat behind all the emotional manipulation. If I didn't give in voluntarily, they would try to take away control of my own finances by force. "Claudia," I said, standing up, "I suggest you consult with a good lawyer before trying that. I just came from an appointment with mine, and he assured me that a person who protects their finances from family abuse is demonstrating mental competence, not the opposite." Her expression changed immediately. She realized she had shown her cards too soon. "I didn't mean..." She began to backtrack. "Yes, you meant exactly that," I interrupted. "And now that I know what your true intentions are, I think this conversation is over." I walked her to the door in silence. Before she left, she said, "Georgia, I hope you reconsider. A family war doesn't benefit anyone." There is no war, Claudia. There is only a woman who has finally learned to value herself. After she left, I sat in my living room and reflected on what I had just heard. Not only were they planning to intensify the emotional manipulation, but they were also considering legal measures to regain control over my money. That evening, I called Mr. Coleman and told him about Claudia's threat. He reassured me, explaining that to declare someone mentally incompetent requires solid medical evidence and an extensive legal process. Acting responsibly with one's personal finances does not qualify as evidence of incompetence. However, he warned me, I recommend you document everything. Record conversations if possible, keep records of their threats, and consider getting a preventative psychological evaluation to have evidence of your mental competence. That night, for the first time since this all began, I felt a little bit of fear. But it wasn't fear of doing something wrong. It was fear of how far they would be willing to go to regain control over my money. But I also felt something stronger than fear: determination. Claudia's threat kept me awake that night, but not from fear. It was from a cold rage that grew with every passing hour. How dare they consider declaring me mentally incompetent for protecting my own money? It was the ultimate manipulation. If you can't get what you want through persuasion, try to strip the person of their legal right to decide about their own life. The next day, Saturday, I followed Mr. Coleman's advice. First, I went to a private clinic where I had a complete psychological evaluation. The doctor, a professional woman in her 50s, listened as I explained the situation. "Mrs. Whitlock," she said after 2 hours of tests and interviews, "let me be perfectly clear. You are demonstrating exceptional mental lucidity. Recognizing patterns of abuse, setting healthy boundaries, and protecting your financial resources are signs of a completely competent mind. In fact, I would say you are acting more rationally now than when you were allowing the financial abuse." She gave me an official report documenting my complete mental competence, dated and sealed. It was my insurance policy against any future legal challenges. When I returned home, I found Lucy working in her garden. She came over to the fence that separated our properties with a worried expression. "Georgia, an older woman came by yesterday asking about you. She wanted to know if you had been acting strangely lately. I told her you seemed happier and more relaxed than ever." I told her about Claudia's visit and her veiled threat. Lucy listened with growing indignation. "That's unbelievable," she exclaimed. "Trying to have you declared incompetent for not wanting to give away your money is the most absurd thing I've ever heard." "What bothers me the most," I said, "is that they truly believe they are entitled to my money. They don't see it as my estate. They see it as their inheritance, paid in advance." "You know what you need?" Lucy said with a mischievous smile. "You need to get out and enjoy your freedom. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" She was right. I had spent so many years living according to the needs and demands of others that I had forgotten what it felt like to do something simply for personal pleasure. "There's a 5-day cruise leaving next Wednesday," Lucy continued. "I was supposed to go with my sister, but she had to cancel due to health issues. Would you like to come with me?" The idea thrilled me immediately. When was the last time I had traveled for pleasure? When had I slept in a bed that wasn't my own, eaten in a restaurant without calculating the cost, or simply relaxed without the constant anxiety of Ryan's next financial crisis? "I would love to," I replied without hesitation. That afternoon, we booked the cruise, $1,500 per person for 5 days, all inclusive. It was a fraction of what I had spent on Ryan and Dana's last vacation, but this time, it would be for my own enjoyment. Sunday morning, while I was figuring out what to pack for the cruise, the doorbell rang. It was Ryan, alone this time. He looked terrible. Deep, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, a desperate expression. "Mom," he said with a broken voice, "please, we need to talk. Without Dana, without shouting, just you and me." I let him in but kept my emotional distance. I had already learned to recognize when I was being manipulated. "Mom, I'm desperate," he began. "The car insurance is due on Monday, and I don't have the money to pay it. If I don't renew it, I can't legally drive, and without a car, I can't get to work." "How much is the insurance?" I asked. $250. "And how much did you earn last month?" $3,500. But what, Ryan?" "But we have expenses. The rent, food, utilities. And what else do you spend money on?" He was quiet for a moment. "Mom, don't you understand? Living is expensive." "Living is expensive when you have a lifestyle you can't afford," I replied. "Tell me one thing, son. How much did you spend on restaurants last month?" "I don't know, maybe." How much do you spend on streaming services, gym memberships, food delivery apps? That's different, Mom. Those are basic necessities. Streaming services are basic necessities? In the modern world, yes. You can't live like a hermit. There was the fundamental problem. Ryan genuinely believed that luxuries were necessities and that real necessities were someone else's responsibility. Ryan, I said calmly, you're 35 years old, you have a college education, you have a job. Why can't you pay a $250 car insurance bill? Because there's no money left after everything else. Then cut back on everything else. It's not that easy. You can't just cut expenses like that. Why not? Why? Why? He became visibly frustrated. Because we have a life to maintain. A life you can't afford, but you've always been there to help us. And there was the naked truth. He wasn't asking for temporary help. He was claiming what he considered his right. In his mind, I was a permanent part of his financial structure, not a mother who occasionally provided support. Ryan, I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Have you ever, in these 10 years, made a real budget and tried to live solely on your salary? He fell silent. Have you ever considered moving to a cheaper apartment? Silence. Have you ever voluntarily cut back on expenses so you wouldn't have to ask me for money? Mom, those are unfair questions. Unfair? It's unfair to ask a 35-year-old adult if he has tried to live within his means. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Dana has expectations. Her friends live a certain way. We can't look poor. And when did you consider that my expectations and my financial pressure mattered? For the first time in the conversation, Ryan was completely silent. I could see in his eyes that he was processing something he had never considered before. Mom, he finally said in a softer voice, I didn't know you felt pressured. Really? You never wondered how I could afford your lifestyle while I ate beans and rice? You never wondered why I never bought new clothes for myself, but always had money for your emergencies? Tears began to roll down his cheeks. I thought you liked helping us. I thought it was your way of showing love. And it was, Ryan. But you turned my love into an obligation. You turned my generosity into an expectation. And finally, you turned my sacrifice into a reason for mockery. Mom, what Dana said was the straw that broke the camel's back, but the glass had been filling up for years. Ryan cried silently for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different, more mature. What can I do to fix this? You can start by paying for your own car insurance. Ryan sat in my living room for almost an hour after our conversation. We didn't talk much more, but I could see that something had changed in his expression. For the first time in years, he seemed to be truly reflecting on his behavior instead of just looking for ways to get what he wanted. When he finally left, he said, Mom, I'm going to find a way to pay for the insurance, and we're going to have a serious talk about our expenses. I didn't completely believe him, but at least it sounded like a first step toward maturity. On Monday morning, as I was packing for my cruise on Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. It was Dana, but her tone was completely different from the one she had used in the previous days. Georgia, she said in a calm voice, I know things have been tense between us. Could we meet for coffee? Without Ryan, without drama, just the two of us. I agreed, more out of curiosity than any hope of reconciliation. We met at a small coffee shop near the mall. Dana arrived dressed more simply than usual, without the expensive jewelry and designer clothes she normally wore. She looked tired, but also more humble. Georgia, she began after we ordered our coffees, I want to sincerely apologize for what I said last week. It was cruel, disrespectful, and completely inappropriate. What made you change your mind? I asked directly. Honestly, the humiliation at the restaurant, but not just that. These past few days, I've had to face the reality of our finances without your support, and I realized something terrifying. What was that? that we have no idea how to live within our means. We've been living for years as if we were rich because you financed the difference between our income and our expenses. It was the first time I had heard Dana offer an honest reflection on her financial situation. Yesterday, she continued, Ryan and I sat down and made a real budget, just with our salaries, without any outside help. Do you know what we discovered? Tell me. That we spend almost double what we earn. Double, Georgia. Not just a little more, but double. And you always covered the difference. And what are you going to do now? We're going to have to make drastic changes. The apartment where we live costs $1,200 a month. With our combined salaries, we should be paying $800 at most. We're going to have to move. And is Ryan on board with that? He resisted at first, but when he saw the numbers on paper, he had no choice. We're also going to have to cancel memberships, services, and completely change the way we socialize. Dana paused to take a sip of her coffee. Georgia, I want to ask you something, and please be honest with me. When did you start to resent our financial dependence? The question surprised me with its directness. I think the resentment grew gradually, but it crystallized when I realized that you not only expected my help, but took it for granted. When was that? When you stopped asking me for money and just started using it. When the additional cards became a normal thing. When my savings became your automatic emergency fund. Dana nodded with a look of shame. You're right. At some point, we stopped seeing you as a person who was helping us and started seeing you as a resource. Exactly. Is there any way we can rebuild our relationship? Dana asked me. I'm going to be completely honest with you. The relationship we had before is gone. That relationship was based on an unsustainable dynamic where I gave and you took. If we want to build something new, it has to be on completely different foundations. What kind of foundations? Mutual respect, financial independence on your part, and a relationship where my value isn't determined by my economic utility. Dana was silent for a long moment. Does that mean you'll never help us again? It means that if you ever need real help in a genuine emergency, after you have proven that you can live responsibly on your own, we could consider it. But it would be help, not a permanent subsidy. How long would we have to prove our independence? It's not a test with a deadline, Dana. It's a change of life. If you can maintain a balanced budget, live within your means, and build your own emergency savings, then you will have demonstrated real financial maturity. And our vacations, our outings to expensive restaurants, those are things you will have to earn with your own work, like most people do. Dana looked genuinely overwhelmed. Georgia, I'm not sure we know how to live like that. Then it's time you learn. You have education, jobs, and abilities. The only thing you've lacked is the motivation to be independent. And if we fail, then you will fail as responsible adults, learning from your mistakes. But at least you will fail as masters of your own decisions, not depending on someone else to solve your problems. We finished our coffees in a thoughtful silence. As we got up to leave, Dana said to me, Georgia, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know that I've learned something important this week. What's that? That being an adult isn't just about being of adult age, it's about taking on adult responsibility. And we've been playing at being adults while you carried the real responsibilities. It was the most mature reflection I had ever heard her make. That night, as I finished packing for my cruise, I felt strangely at peace. I hadn't lost a family. I had left behind a toxic dynamic that was hurting all of us. If Ryan and Dana truly wanted to change, they would have to prove it with actions, not words. On Tuesday, I received a text message from Ryan. Mom, I got a personal loan to pay for the car insurance. I also found a cheaper apartment. We're moving next month. I wanted you to know. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small step toward the independence they so desperately needed. That night, I slept soundly, knowing that the next day I would begin my first truly personal adventure in decades. The cruise was a revelation. 5 days of waking up when I wanted, eating whatever I craved, and doing activities just because they brought me pleasure. Lucy turned out to be the perfect travel companion, independent, fun, and completely free of family drama. On the ship, I met other women my age who had been through similar experiences. During one dinner, a woman named Elaine told me how her 3 adult children had drained her retirement fund before she finally said enough was enough. Another woman, Isabel, had discovered that her son was using her credit card to gamble online. "What surprised me the most," Isabel said as we watched the sunset from the deck, "was realizing that I wasn't the only one. I thought it was a problem unique to my family, but it turns out there's a whole generation of parents who don't know how to say no to our adult children." When I returned home on Sunday, I felt renewed. 5 days without a single call asking for money, without financial anxiety, without the constant burden of solving other people's problems. It was like remembering who I was before I became the family bank. There were several messages on my answering machine, but to my surprise, none of them were a desperate demand for money. Ryan had called twice simply to see if I had arrived home safely from the trip. Dana had left a short message. "I hope you enjoyed your cruise. We'd love to hear about your experience when you have time." On Monday morning, Lucy came to visit with coffee and pastries to hear all the details of the trip. As we chatted on my patio, I saw Ryan's car park in my driveway, but this time, instead of getting out immediately and heading for my door, he sat in the car for several minutes. When he finally rang the doorbell, his expression was different. He seemed nervous, but also more mature somehow. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "I know you just got back from your trip, but could we talk for a moment?" I invited him in. Lucy discreetly excused herself and went back to her house. "Mom, I wanted to tell you what we've been doing this week," Ryan began. "Dana and I moved into a smaller apartment. We're paying $400 less in rent per month." "How do you feel about the change?" "Honestly, it was tough at first. The apartment is smaller, it's in a less fancy neighborhood, but after a few days, I realized something important." "What was that?" "That I can sleep peacefully knowing that we're paying for everything with our own money. I don't have that constant anxiety of not knowing how we're going to cover next month's expenses." It was the first time I had heard Ryan talk about financial anxiety from his perspective. It had never occurred to me that he might have also been stressed by the unsustainability of his lifestyle. "We also canceled the expensive gym memberships and signed up for a basic one that costs a fifth of the price," he continued, "and Dana found a part-time job on weekends to generate extra income." "Dana is working more?" "Yes, and it was her idea. She says she wants to contribute more actively to our finances instead of just managing money that comes from other places." I was surprised to hear that Dana had taken that initiative. "Mom, I also wanted to apologize formally, not just for what happened 2 weeks ago, but for all these years. I never realized I was treating you like an ATM instead of my mother." "What made you realize it?" "When we had to make our first real budget, I realized I had no idea how much it really cost to live. My entire adult life, I had been living beyond my means because you covered the difference." Ryan paused and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mom, I want you to know that these last few days have been the first in years where I truly feel like an adult, making my own decisions, solving my own problems, being responsible for my own consequences." "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying, but also liberating. I didn't know how much weight I was carrying until I got rid of it." "Weight?" "The weight of knowing deep down that I wasn't truly independent. The weight of knowing I was living a financial lie. The weight of knowing that my lifestyle depended on exploiting my mother's generosity." Those words hit me deeply. For years, I had thought I was the only one suffering in that dynamic. But it turned out that Ryan had also been carrying guilt and anxiety. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but there's something I'd like to ask you." "Tell me." "Do you think we can ever have a normal relationship? A relationship where I'm your son who visits you because he loves you, not because he needs something?" The question moved me because it implied that he understood the difference. "Ryan, that relationship can start today if you want it to. I've always wanted to have a son who visits me because he cares about me, not because I'm useful. So, would you like it if Dana and I came for lunch on Sunday? We'll bring the food, we'll cook, and we'll just spend time together. I would love that. After Ryan left, I sat in my living room reflecting on everything that had changed in 2 weeks. I had lost my role as my family's financial savior, but I had gained something more valuable: my self-respect and the possibility of a genuine relationship with my son. That night, I called Mr. Coleman to ask about modifying my will again. After the conversation with Ryan, I wanted to consider a different approach. Instead of punishing him permanently, I decided to create a will that rewarded maturity demonstrated over time. As Whitlock, the lawyer said, "You're thinking of a tiered will based on behavior." Exactly. If Ryan demonstrates real financial independence for 2 consecutive years, he could receive a larger portion. If he continues that pattern for 5 years, another larger portion. But if he falls back into his old habits, we revert to the original plan. It's an intelligent structure. It incentivizes long-term personal growth. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in years, I was planning my future based on hope instead of fear. Hope that my son had truly learned and grown. Hope that our relationship could heal. Hope that my final years would be lived with dignity and respect. I went out to my patio and looked at the stars. In the distance, I heard the sound of the fountain I had installed in my garden last year, a small luxury I had allowed myself only after years of doubting whether I deserved to spend that money on myself. Now I knew the answer. I had always deserved to treat myself with the same generosity I had shown to others. It had taken me 68 years to learn that lesson, but I had finally learned it, and I would never forget it again. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can write more stories like this. Thanks a lot in advance. What about you? What would you do in this person's shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and let me know where you've heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. Big hugs, and see you next time.